Hi, I'm Aaron, and welcome back to Keep Painting Minis. Today we're going to paint the Heroquest Barbarian hero, who matches the original box art from the 1989 release of the original Heroquest game. This mini comes from Monstrous Encounters that you can find on My Mini Factory. Link in the description, no affiliations, but I love their sculpts. If you love HeroQuest and you love dungeon crawlers, check out Monstrous Encounters at My Mini Factory. Now today we're going to spend a little extra time on the Barbarian's face and the skin tone so that I can show you a few takeaway tips that we'll recap at the end, so stay for the ride. Now let's get painting. We've primed the Barbarian with Citadel's Wraithbone because other than the skin and the face, we're going to be using speed paints and contrast paints, and Wraithbone makes a great undercoat for the speed paints and contrast paints. So we'll begin our Barbarian with an undercoat of Citadel's Kislev Flesh, and that will be the base upon which we build for the Barbarian's skin tones. So water down your Kislev Flesh just a little bit so that it goes on smoothly, and if you need a couple of coats, then just be patient, let the first coat dry, and put on your second coat so that you have ultimately a nice, smooth, uniform, opaque Kislev Flesh. Now I handle the face a little bit differently. For the face, I just use the Guilliman Flesh Citadel Contrast Paint straight over the Wraithbone because I feel that gives me a slightly brighter base coat to start with compared to the Kislev Flesh, which is what I want for the face, to be just a little bit distinct from the rest of the flesh tones. And now we're going to shade the rest of his skin with a 1-to-1 mix of the Citadel Reikland Flesh Tone Shade and the Citadel Contrast Medium. After a lot of experimentation, I just found that this combination of a Citadel Shade and the Contrast Medium makes for a recipe that flows really well into the recesses and doesn't stain very much or pool much on the flatter surfaces, and also gives me a little more working time than straight contrast paint. So give that a try, mix some shades with the contrast medium and see what you think. So here comes today's takeaway tip number 1. Get yourself a useful face painting reference. This one is absolutely my favorite, and you can find it at the link in the description below. I always struggled, and still do, knowing where to put the shadows and the highlights on the human face. So I found myself this reference, and I don't leave home without it. So here, following the reference, I start with Bugman's Glow, and I'm painting in the eye sockets and the shadows underneath the brow, and you can see I'm doing my best to try to match the reference. Next, I'm coming in with Kislev Flesh to find those mid-tone highlight areas, like the top of the cheekbone that you can see me painting here. And note that I try to position the figure whenever I remember so that my brush strokes are from top to bottom. I'm pulling down because that's the way I find I can best steady my hand for a careful brush stroke. And next I'm going to come in with a thinned down Bugman's Glow to try to reinforce the shadow areas. So that's the lower cheek there, that's the crease on either side of that skin fold that runs from the nose down to the lower jaw. Again, following the reference, coming into the side of the nose to darken that down a little bit, and generally using this thin down shadow color to smooth things out a bit. Now you can see that the face is still fairly patchy, and we're going to smooth that out even further with the upcoming coat here of a very thin down mixture of Emperor's Children with a little bit of burnt red to bring some life into the face, with a little red that reflects the blood flow under the face, and also allows us to smooth out the transitions between the different tones we've already laid down. And this will do a fairly good job of smoothing that out at this stage. And then we'll hit the face again with the same recipe when we apply that to the rest of his skin as well later in the process. And now for the most fussy part, the eyes. We don't use white for the white of the eyes. Instead we use this bright warm gray from Pro Acryl because white is just too stark when you see it on the model. And here we are with takeaway tip of the day number 2, magnifying glasses. Without these babies, I would have neither the patience nor the control for the back and forth that's required to get myself a matching pair of eyeballs. The link to these particular glasses is in the description below. So you can see what I mean by patience. Here I am hitting reset on the right eye with my Bugman's Glow so that I can give that eyeball another shot. So just be patient, have your other skin tone colors at the ready so that you can hit reset and try again, and position your mini so that you can always be coming in with a downward stroke. Takeaway tip number 3 of the micro pen for pupils. This is the 003 size, which I find to be exactly right. I did do the pupils off camera, but you can see with care and that micro pen you get some decent pupils. Because the pen's a lot easier to control compared to the floppy end of a detail paintbrush. Now we're coming in with a final highlight of Citadel Flayed One Flesh, trying to track the reference picture again, highlighting the tip of the nose, the top of the brow, the top of the chin, the top of the cheekbones. And we'll smooth everything out with one more thin glaze coat when we finish off the rest of his skin, which will get us to this really pleasing result. And now turning to the rest of his skin, we'll begin by reinforcing the shadows that we laid down with the wash earlier with a thin down Mornfang brown. What we're doing here is gently going into the creases and coming up a little bit higher on the lower portion of the muscle folds where the shadows would tend to be. We don't want too much of this dark color on the top portion of the muscle folds because those aren't in shadow as much as the lower portion of the muscle folds, so that you can see that I'm intentionally reinforcing the shadow only on the bottoms of the muscle folds and not the tops of the muscle folds. Now we're coming in with the next tone up for the skin tones, and that is Kislev Flesh with just a dash of Mornfang brown so that it isn't as abrupt a change in value, brightness, compared to the shadows that we laid down. Thin this down to a little more than a glaze consistency, so fairly opaque, but a little bit transparent, and make your way around the model, hitting the tops of the muscles, the parts that are facing up that would catch most of the light. Now you can see that the muscle separation is still very stark, but just bear with this ugly phase until we get to our takeaway tip of the day number 4 that will bring everything together. But first we're adding a little bit of sunny skin tone to taste, if you will, to bring this up one shade brighter than the mixture we had before. We're just adding sunny skin tone, just a dash, to that 1:4 Moringfane Brown and Kislev. And here we're focusing again on the tops of the muscles, the parts that would catch the light, and painting less surface area than we did with the prior layer. Now for a final highlight on the skin tones, we're coming in with Flayed 1 Flesh, very thin down as you saw in the back of the thumbnail, and just selectively covering the very most upper facing portions of the muscle folds. And now takeaway tip number 4 of the day is bringing it all together, both the main flesh tones and the face flesh tones, with this very thin glaze of the mix of Emperor's Children and a small dash of burnt red. And we're starting at the center of the muscles and working our way down into the shadow to smooth out the transitions and bring some life to that skin tone to reflect the blood flow that we see under natural skin. Okay, hard part over, but it was worth it. We're real happy with the skin tones in the face, both key focal points of this model, and now we're just going to turn to speed paints and contrast paints for the rest of the figure. And those lend themselves very well to this particular barbarian figure because the rest of the portions are highly textured, which is wonderful for speed paints. We're beginning with Vallejo's Express Color Wasteland Brown for the leather and the fur of the boots. And now we're going to highlight those boots with a dry brushing of Citadel's Uriel Yellow, and although this seems very bright, you'll see that it suits the boots well because we're just doing a gentle dry brush with this flat brush that can be dragged across the texture. By dry brush we mean that we put just a little bit of paint on the brush and then wipe almost all of it off and then gently drag the brush against the textured surface to leave some of that dry paint behind. Now coming in with Citadel Skeleton Horde Contrast for the trim and the straps on the boots. And now to highlight that trim and those straps, we're coming in with Citadel Flayed 1 Flesh and focusing on the upper edges of the trim and the straps lower on the boots. And now for the Barbarian's furry skirt, we're coming in with Army Paint or Speed Paint 2.0 version, a Ruddy Fur, which is a reddish brown that matches the furry skirt that the Barbarian's wearing on the original box art. I did go in with a second coat of the Ruddy Fur speed paint, and now we're highlighting with Citadel's Evil Sun Scarlet, which adds some depth and also brings out that red tone even more. Now we'll head to the hair with a base coat of Citadel Black Templar Contrast. And now we'll come in to highlight the hair. So we're putting these three colors on the palette, a neutral gray, a bright gray, and a white. And you'll see that I'll work through 3 steps of successively lighter highlights to highlight the black hair. And what you'll see is with the darkest of the highlights, I'm covering most of the strands. And then as I increase the brightness, by adding the bright gray and the white, I cover less and less of the strands, and I look for the parts of these wavy strands that are sort of the outermost and uppermost. And with my brighter and brighter highlights, I cover less and less and just try to hit those peaky areas to create sort of a flowing, wavy look. Now on to the metallics. In an effort to match the box art, we're coming in with the dark silver for his belt and bracelets. This is a Pro Acryl dark silver, which has wonderful coverage. Now we're going to shade that dark silver with the Citadel Dragonhof Nightshade, which is a blue shade that will further add a cool hue to the dark silver metallic, which is a nice contrast to all the warm colors of the furry skirt and the skin tones. Now coming in with Citadel Lead Belcher, which is not terribly bright, but brighter than the dark silver, for highlights on the dark silver, and also for a base coat on the sword blade. For the highlights, you can see I'm gently tapping each of the studs and the upper facing portions of the bracelets And then I'll move on to the sword blade, which is going to require a couple of coats. Whenever you need more than one coat for full coverage, keep the coats thin and wait till each coat is completely dry before applying another coat. Now coming in with Citadel's Retributor armor, which has got great coverage for the sword hilt, and also he's got earrings and he's got a golden headband. And now we'll shade the lower edge of the sword blade with the Pro Acryl Dark Silver to add some depth and contrast to the look of the blade. And we're getting the lower edge of both sides. And similarly coming in with Pro Acryl Silver, which is a silver that's much brighter than the Lead Belcher base coat we used, to add some contrast and separation on the upper facing edges of the sword blade. Now, some might find this unusual, but I like to highlight my silver metallics with a bright ivory rather than an even brighter silver, because frankly I can never see the highlight when I'm just highlighting metallics with metallics. And so I'll also use the bright ivory on the gold, as you'll see. First we are shading down the gold to make it a little more rustic with the Citadel Reikland Flesh shade, and then we'll come in with the bright ivory again for the edge highlight on the sword's hilt. And with that, we're ready to pull back the curtain for a final look of our Heroquest Barbarian from the box art of the original 1989 release of the game. And also, let's recap our 4 takeaway tips of the day. Tip number 1. A visual reference for where to put the highlights and shadows on the face is simply invaluable. Tip number 2. The micro pen for painting pupils. Tip number 3. The magnifiers for getting after those tiny details like the eyes and the pupils. Tip number 4, that pink with a little bit of red mixed in, thin glaze to bring the skin tones all together. Well, as always, I hope you liked watching the video as much as I like painting. If you did like the video, please hit that like button, and if you want to see more, please hit the subscribe and the bell button, and share the video with others you think might be interested. Until I see you again, let's all keep painting minis.